Hi and welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast for another Authors Tuesday. Today I'm delighted to be joined by another great guest, who's coming on from England. Really looking forward to talking to Chris Tetrarult Blay. I hope I pronounced that correct. I think I've got close anyway. But
You have.
yeah,
Well
so,
done. Yeah.
so yeah, Chris has done some horror books and also over the last couple of years done children's book. So that's my kind of genre as well. So I'm looking forward to talking to Chris today. So thanks a lot for joining me today, Chris. You're very welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mark, for having me. No, it's brilliant. I've been really looking forward to this one.
Yeah,
Been a
me
while
too.
since I've been on this side, I think,
Yeah,
on the
yeah, because
podcast, so this
you're
is
not
quite good.
you're normally on the other side, yeah.
Yeah, I
So
have
you were
been.
saying,
I
yeah,
have been.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So no,
yeah,
this is good. This is good.
yeah. So we might get you to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on as well. That'd
Cool.
be great. So
Yeah.
we probably started off like I normally do. You might tell the listeners about yourself and your interest in writing, where that began.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I think my response is probably going to be as cliche as you have writers. You say, I've always wanted to be a writer. I think it's even just as cliche nowadays for a writer to say I never intended to become a writer, and that's really where it came from for me. Um, so I grew up, just a bit of background. I grew up in a town called Basingstoke in the south of England. I moved down to Devon in 2005 after I went to university. So I mean, I never really knew what I wanted to do. To be fair, I've always just had normal day jobs, things like that. I didn't really know anything that I wanted to do until around about it's about 2013. I started to actually get the urge to start writing. Um, I said at the time it was never anything I set out to do. It wasn't that I sat down and I decided I'm going to write books. I'm going to be a writer. That's where I want to go. It took me a while to remember that back in school that I did it really enjoy creative writing. I put it to the back of my mind because I really wasn't one who enjoyed much of school, but I kind of forgot my love for doing things creative at school, and I've gone back and I've seen some of the stories and things that I wrote as a kid, and you can kind of see it was there, I suppose. But no, 2013 was a year that I was going through a lot of personal changes. I was at the metaphorical kind of crossroads in terms of things like mental health and things like that. I'd opened up to a few struggles I was having then, and I was trying to find a way of just sort of expressing myself and getting rid of this sort of tension and things that I was having. And I was on a bit of a journey. The second half of the year, I found out that my wife and I found out that we were going to be parents, and my mind just went in all kinds of different directions. And I needed something to channel my thoughts. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I just pulled on. I I I sat down with my laptop once, and I've always been into music. I'm a self-taught guitarist as well. I'm not going to claim that I'm Eric Clapton or anything like that. I can hold a note, in my on my own. But I always wanted to be in a band. Music was my big thing. So I started off trying to just put words down, into like lyric form. Um, Thinking maybe one day if I made it, I could have some songs there I can fall back on. But it was really helping me. It was a cathartic process, actually just writing stuff down. And I decided I was then going to keep a diary. I was going to write a diary of like the next 9 months. Once I realized that I was going to be a dad, I thought I'm going to write a diary to produce something that my kids can look back on. And it was going to be my kind of take on my journey into fatherhood. This is who I am. Before you knew me, this is who I was. This is what I was going through. That lasted about a week. And then I started to pen different things. And I thought, yeah, I had a few kind of ideas for stories, and being a fan of heavy metal music and horror cinema and horror fiction, novels and things like that. Naturally, the darker side and the things I was going through at the time as well. Naturally, the darker side of my psyche was coming out. So I put this diary to my unborn children aside, and I just started capturing. I thought I've got like 3 or 4 different stories here. I'm just going to capture bits of each, try to make them into short stories, see where they go. And over sort of the course of the next year, they weren't really going anywhere until I sat here and I was writing one of these threads, and I was able to actually find something that brought them all together. And actually, all three of them converged into what would be my debut novel, which, like you touched on, I started off in horror fiction,
Mm,
um, and that was really where it started. So 2014, I really started to kind of take it a bit more seriously, putting this story together, and I used National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, however you'd like to say it. I partook in that 2014, the only year I've successfully done that challenge.
brilliant.
And I was able to actually get the bulk of my debut novel done then. And then my wife spotted a few Facebook ads coming up from independent publishers and, asking for submissions. The first time I knew that you could do that without an agent or anything like that. So she was like, give it a go.
Mhm.
And I did. And literally, my first or second try, I managed to find a publisher who wanted to take my book on.
Wow.
And that was it. And that's where it
Congratulations.
all kind of, that's, I, I'm not going to say it's the best story in the world, but there was obviously something in it that got their attention, which was brilliant. It
Brilliant.
just set me off on that journey. And that's really 2015 that was published. And that's really where the journey kind of started, over the next, where are we? Not 10 years later. So,
Well, that's great. Thanks very much for sharing it. Like,
right.
and yeah, and it's a great journey. Like, it's great to get your work there, as you say, to have your kids to look back on, and then you never know where it's going to lead. Like your different books. What was the name of each book there? If you don't mind me asking you that, just
Yeah,
to let the people who are listening, like, and then you might just for people who are watching on YouTube as well, to show them the books, and maybe
yeah,
read a little bit of it. It would be perfect.
of
Thank you.
course.
Yeah.
So for the purpose of this, so I'll my journey started with my horror fiction books, like I said, and I went through that kind of phase where I released four horror fiction novels, just very quickly: Acolyte, Sowing Season, Of Gods and Insects. They were all part of my trilogy called The Wildemore Apocalypse, and then A Necessary End was like a standalone book of my horror things. That's my favorite. I'll just get that in there. But then I kind of, as my parenthood journey kind of progressed, this is where I then got into the idea of writing children's books.
Yeah.
It's one thing someone said to me quite early on. I was doing an interview just after I started, just after my first book was released, and they were like, "Is there any genre that you want to have a crack at,
Mm.
apart from horror?" And I was like, "I would love to write a children's book because I think it's the most challenging market." So it's the first one. So It's a
Cool.
Long Way to the Moon.
Mm.
This was my first children's book. This was released in 2019. And then the next year, I followed it up with quite a seasonal offering to follow on It's a Long Night for Santa. Um, so they are both rhyming children's picture books,
Mm.
sort of 2 to 6 years old, that kind of thing. That was at the time, that was there were the type of stories I was reading to my kids every night. So naturally following that progression, and there was a certain type of story I was enjoying reading as a parent. So I really wanted to capture that and give that back almost. I was like, if I'm going to write a children's story, I want it to be as much fun for the parents to read as it is for the kids to hear it.
Definitely.
And this is where they came on. So yeah, no, just
Yeah,
flashing
I
that
love
big.
the illustrations. They're really good.
Thank you.
Did you do them yourself, or did you get an artist?
No, I would love to take credit for that. No, I've got to give a shout out to Greg Carter, who's the illustrator, who the publisher that I managed to go with, to produce these books. They had him. I don't know if they went out and found him specially, or I think they had a connection with him, at the time. He was absolutely perfect. I I didn't have to give much of a brief. I think the publisher asked what I was after, and we found out actually after a quick exchange we were very, very much on the same page. My inspiration, but behind the actual story and how I've written it, was Julia Donaldson. My kids absolutely adored those books, and I really, really loved that kind of rhyming style. I really got into that. Um, but the look of it, I wanted something that was striking but very, very simple, a lot like The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. So as soon as I kind of said that, they came back with the initial illustrations that Greg did, and I was like, absolutely spot on. The little brown moth, the key character in this, I don't know if you can see very well, but
Yeah,
such
yeah,
simple design, and he's got buttons for eyes. and it's almost looks like he's made out of fabric, and that is exactly what I was after. It's just a very, very simple yet very warm, striking kind of um, look about it.
Yeah. No, they worked out really well. Like, it's great when you meet the actual artist that knows what you want, isn't it?
Yeah,
And yeah, brilliant. And would you mind just maybe just reading a section of that book, like to even just the information part, please?
I can. Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
absolutely. So off the back of the blurb, this is the
yeah,
bit that I absolutely cannot do myself. So thankfully they did a great job with this. So it's a long way to the moon tells the story of a moth who one night decides to try and fly to the moon. Along the way, he meets several animal friends who try to help him, one of which teaches him a much simpler way that his dream can be realized. Very simple concept,
great,
essentially.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's what I loved about that is the actual idea of the story was came to me in such a simple way, and
yeah, yeah.
I think everything about this story came out exactly as I'd planned. So
Sounds brilliant. Thanks a lot for sharing that. That's great.
no worries, no
Yeah.
problem.
And as well as that, where can people get their hands on the books? I know it normally Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but do you have them in any bookshops or just for people that are listening to let them know where to get them?
Amazon, you can find them on Amazon. You can find all of my stuff on Amazon. I think you can still order them through the likes of WH Smiths and Waterstones and that over here in the UK. I'm not sure overseas. I think Barnes and Noble possibly sort of over in America that you may still find them on the catalogue there. I never did crack having physical copies in shops. Um, there was something that whenever you start off with a new book, you want it to be physically on the shelves.
Hmm.
As much as an advocate as I am for like ebooks and things like that, I think you can't beat having a physical book on the shelf. But I wasn't able so far anyway. I haven't been able to crack that and get it into many shops apart from sort of those ones if you were to order them in. A lot of independent bookshops I would love to have got into, and we blame COVID for a lot of things. And I think unfortunately I had a lot of plans for these books because of when they were released. The first one was released in December for Christmas 2019. And I had plans in place for marketing the book and being able to actually get it out there. And the brakes were put on all of them literally a few months later. And I never really recovered from it, sadly. Um, yeah, who
And
knows?
yeah, and do you have an author's page as well, Chris, for
Yeah,
people to check out? I know I'm going to ask you to send you all the links so I can share them on the show notes. But
I appreciate that.
do you have an author's page yourself? Have you got one set up?
I do, yeah. So on Facebook, I've actually got two. I'm greedy. I've got two authors pages on Facebook. So I've got one. You'll find me Chris Tetrarult Blay author. That is my main author page where I kind of encompass everything that I've done. All of my books and all my podcasts in that. But for the as I call them, the Little Brown Moth books, in particular, you'll find a Facebook page called The Adventures of the Little Brown Moth. And that is dedicated to these books, and that was what I was using and still use, from time to time when I've got updates and that for those books specifically. Yeah,
Right. And do you have any kind of merchandise with them books as well? Have you went into that area?
I didn't. You know what? Again, it's one of those that I thought out of all of my books that I could have done something with. It would have been these two. I haven't yet, which is sad because I think if anything now I brought this along just in case the opportunity came up. So I got this little guy here, right?
Oh, cool.
So,
Yeah,
so
great stuff.
So this is it's a one-off. My mother-in-law made me this, and she gave it to me just before last Christmas. She's crocheted it, and
Oh,
she's got
brilliant. Yeah,
buttons on there and everything. It's fantastic, isn't it? I've got to give her a shout out.
yeah,
So if I could have things like these, I mean, I think
mhm,
it really lends itself
yeah,
to having these like plush, cuddly characters and that. Sadly, not at the moment, but again, if I can get to that stage, that is what I would absolutely love to have. Yeah.
yeah, great. And no, no, brilliant. That's really good. I'd say the kids love that.
It is
Yeah,
fantastic. It lives on our
yeah.
Christmas tree because
Oh, great.
she's obviously modelled it on the one from It's a Long Night to
Yeah,
Santa.
yeah,
So
brilliant.
it hangs. I got a tiny little display
Mm.
up in this room with a few of my books out, and I have him hanging there all
Oh,
year
cool.
until it's December, and then he goes on the tree, and
Great. Yeah,
he loves that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And how have you found the Amazon for selling your books, Chris? How have you found that?
Um, see, it's. I think that is the best platform that I'm on. If I'm honest,
Yeah,
no, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not, setting the world alight in terms of how many books are sell. It's very, very difficult. There's so much out there, and it's very difficult to stand out. But Amazon is the easiest place to direct people to. You'd struggle, I think, to find people who haven't got an Amazon account and have Prime delivery, and it's very, very good to be able to say to them, you can order my books from here and you can have them like tomorrow. It's a long night for it's a long way to the moon is actually available as an ebook and an audiobook as well. Which I believe you can get all three formats on Amazon. So which is really good, for me, because again, there's so many people out there that have developed more of a love for audiobooks than actually reading the print form. So hopefully they're enjoying those as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because I'm a fan of the Kindle books as well. That's great.
There you go. There you go.
Can I ask you as well? Have you approached libraries at all, Chris? Is that something you've done?
Yeah, so this was all part of my master plan. At the beginning of around about sort of March 2020, when I was starting to, wheels were in motion for it's a long way to the moon, and I was actually setting up. I had 4 or 5 local libraries. I had a reading event set up where I'd go in and I'd read the book. I'd have a dedicated session, an hour-long session on a Saturday. I'd read the book. I had some like craft sheets made up that my wife made up, and it would just be like a whole kind of story time, craft time session. And with each of those, I was able to get copies of the book into the libraries as well as a thank you. So there are some floating around locally here, and hopefully it may well have gone beyond that. And again, I had to cancel the last couple I had of those because lockdown came along, and that was that. But it's an ideal way, I think, for anyone out there who is particularly with books like these, children's books. If you're looking for an ideal way to get out there in the community and getting your books visible and people to enjoy them, libraries are definitely the way to go. They're so supportive. So,
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. Yeah, because it is a good avenue. All right, definitely. Yeah, it's just good to let people know it's in the library as well. So
yeah.
it's a bit of a positive. Yeah, great.
Yes.
So, what kind of strategy would you use yourself when you're writing? Like some people, as you know, probably write a certain amount of words a day, or even when your horror stories, your horror books. And
Mm.
how did you work out the strategy? Did you have some kind of strategy, Chris?
My strategy is to not have a strategy. I think that's what works for me. I've sit here in awe of a lot of the authors I know who are so organized. They've got whiteboards up on their wall. They got storyboards going on and everything, and string, all the cross looks like a crime scene, kind of.
Yeah,
One of those kind of things where you're trying to, you've had
yeah,
police. You see them in these programs where the police have got these massive boards that are coloured to hell.
yeah.
I've tried and I just can't. I think in my head, I know when I'm ready to write. And when I get that urge, I don't have the urge to sit here and spend time plotting it out. I just want to write and get it out. All of my books have been written, bar the Little Brown Moth books. I had a slightly different strategy with those, I suppose, but with my horror books, they were all written with me just sitting in front of the laptop. No plan at all. The story developed as I was writing it. I would do I dedicated about an hour a day back then. I was using my lunch break at work. I'd leave my desk, I'd go sit in my car with my laptop, I'd write for an hour and I'd go back to work. And that worked for the first couple of years. That's how I managed to get those 4 books done. And that would be my time. I would shut myself off I couldn't have any distractions. I would need time or be in somewhere that gave me some kind of inspiration. When it came to the Little Brown Moth books, the inspiration for that came out of nothing. It was just one little thing, one flippant comment I made to my wife one night that set this idea in motion. And because of the nature of it, because it's a rhyming book, I found myself I was going through the story in my head constantly. I could be driving to work, I'd be doing the washing up or whatever, and I'm just trying to play over these like 4-line stanzas to try and get something to rhyme. And that's where it was really fun for me because it harked back to doing like my song lyrics. Like I was trying to do that right at the beginning. And I didn't know what was going to develop. So I always had to make sure I had something that I could record these on. And I used a notepad app on my phone over 3 weeks. And I just wrote down all the lines that came to me, all the ideas, and it kind of, I wrote it in that form. But for me, the only strategy I have is just leaving myself open
Mm.
and able to capture inspiration. I'm not a planner. I am a pantser in every sense of the word. Um, I've said to myself, because my writing has slowed down over the last couple of years, and I've said to myself, when I launch back into it properly, I want to do something different. I'm going to plan, and I have tried, and I've started writing notes in a notebook. I can't tell you the amount of notebooks I've got around with just random bits in it which don't make any
Yeah.
sense. I just don't think it's in me. So I think I need that pressure of the idea is here, and I need to write it down now, otherwise it's going to go, and that's it. Rather than if I put a plan up there, I probably won't look at it again for 6 months, and then I'll struggle to remember what anything meant. Um, so that works for me. It's not going to work for everyone. Like I say, there's a lot of people out there that will need that structure, but for me, it just hasn't worked for some reason.
Well, Chris, it does sound like a good strategy because it makes a lot of sense to me because if you don't get it down there, like you could forget it. Like inspiration comes from a lot of
Yeah,
places, doesn't it?
it does. It does.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I love. And if I kind of bring my podcast, one of my podcast shows into it just very quickly. The first podcast that I started doing called Dead Men Talk, I created it during lockdown as a means for me to talk about everything that inspired me and all the characters or the settings that were in some of my books. They all had a meaning. They came from somewhere. And I think I used that show then to explore other people's creativity because I really am a fan of knowing where these ideas have come from because sometimes they just come out of absolutely nothing. And they come from a fleeting moment that if you don't acknowledge it, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could choose to take something from it and turn it into something. And I think it's the art of one of my heroes who I got to interview for my show actually he used the phrase the art of something from nothing, and that's really stuck with me. It's like you
That's
can
great.
create,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, you could have
Mm.
nothing and you could have something at the end of it.
Yeah, that sounds a great strategy to me.
Yeah.
Chris, very good, great stuff. And it kind of moves on nicely to the next question I was going to ask today as well. Can you tell the listeners about your biggest success so far? Like I know you just mentioned your podcast, and
Mm.
you had somebody famous from the BBC, Chris Jarvis, who read your books as
I
well.
did.
Um,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about that? That'd be great. That's
Yeah.
well done for that, Chris. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those sort of things. He didn't come finding me. Um, it would be lovely if it happened that way around, but it was an opportunity that I became aware of and I pursued it. And there was I don't think it's running anymore, but there was like an independent radio station called Little Radio UK, which was set up, and it was very much aimed at young families, young children and parents. And it was run by a couple of guys that were from CBBC, and that, and Chris Jarvis was one of them. For anyone out there who knows, oh, I can't remember. I had it in my head there. The show that he did on CBBC. It was in here. I used to watch. I got subjected to it every day. Um, and I can't
There's
remember the
been a few of
title of
them.
it, but yeah, but it was him and the person who he hosted that with. I think they were two of the main driving forces behind Little Radio UK. And what they did is they opened themselves up to authors of children's writers to be able to contact them if they had a book that they could read out, and they would record a full-on audiobook reading that would then go out on Little Radio UK. And Chris Jarvis himself was the one who did not one of the Little Moth books, but he did both of them for me, which I thought was fantastic. Because they had a few people who did these readings, and I was really hoping it would be him, and then it was. So I just simply got in touch with them, gave them the spiel about me, sent them my book, and then they came back to me to said that they'd like to record it, and it would be Chris Jarvis. And I got told about 2 weeks ahead of when it would be, so I made a big thing
Yeah,
of that. And it's the sad thing is that I couldn't be sent or keep a recording of it because obviously it's not my copyright and things like it. It went up on the radio station, that's where it stayed. It's not something I can kind of get put out there myself. Then when I released It's a Long Night for Santa, actually there was the opportunity there again, for that, and he did a fantastic job. It's when you've got someone who is made for children's entertainment.
yeah, yeah.
They certainly put a different spin on it, and it's so yeah, it was just a fantastic experience. I actually, through my publisher, I had It's a Long Night for Santa read. There is a video on YouTube of Anita Harris. Anyone who knows her, singer actress from the
Know
Carry
her,
On
yeah.
films and that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, oh, wow, yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
she did a special Christmas reading of it, which the video is still up there on YouTube of It's a Long Night for Santa. And I was just like always like riding this wave of like there's my books, there's 3 times there my books have been read by recognizable
Mm.
people, and they just did, yeah, it did wonders for my confidence and belief in them, where it could
That's
go.
awesome. That's absolutely brilliant, Chris. Well done.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, if you have that video, you might share with us, and I can put it on the show notes as well.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
because
send you
it
the
would.
link for it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great
it's
stuff. Yeah,
no
yeah. And
worries.
so, would you say that your biggest success going forward with your books? Would you say that would come into that, or
Yeah,
yeah,
I think so. I think
yeah,
everything, it, it's okay to to aim for the whole moral behind It's a Long Way to the Moon is aiming for your dreams, no matter how far away they might be, and if you're told you can't, they're impossible to realize, you can find a way to do them. And I think with this kind of thing is you take whatever opportunities come along. I could sit here and I'll say I will be satisfied when I'm selling the amount that Julie Donaldson does. I'm as recognizable as her. My big dream is to have the Christmas Day slot on BBC, like she does. We're not going to unseat Julie Donaldson anytime soon for the Christmas Day slot on BBC. But I think while you're waiting for those things to happen, all these other things these other opportunities you can grab them while they're there, because as it would show, things can knock your trajectory like mine did. And, I've not been able to pick up the momentum I had with these books a few years ago, but I was able to achieve that within that time. So if I do nothing else, at least I can say that, and I know that it's something I wouldn't have dreamed of before. So
yeah. It's
yeah,
great success. Well done. That's great.
thank
And
you.
do you want to talk about your podcast as well, Chris? I'm very interested in that because being a podcaster since before COVID or just when COVID started.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was COVID that, like I mentioned, it was COVID that kind of got me into it. So, yeah, COVID came along, and my inspiration to write got knocked quite severely. One reason or another. Like I say, I had these events set up. My momentum for my little moth books was trampled on because I had these library readings set up. I had almost like a residency, if you can call it that, in agreement with a soft play center here where I live, and I was going to do a bunch of dates over like a few months. They were going to have me back in, and then lockdown came. That all kind of went to pot, and I was left thinking, what do I do now? And the one, I was working on a horror story at the time where the subject matter of it was way too close to what was going on, so I needed to step away from that book because it was like, it's too real now. I can't be dealing with what's going on outside and then coming and writing about it here. So I had a couple of author friends of mine who got into podcasting. They'd been on podcasts as guests, and then one of them came up with she created started her own podcast, and she had me on as a guest. And I thought, it sounds like a good thing to do. I hate the sound of my own voice, or I did back then. I've kind of got used to it now.
Yeah.
And I mentioned to her on her show, I would love to do a podcast. My laptop is about to die, and it will not cope with what I need to do to successfully do a podcast. So bless her, she found a way of she did something in the background. She reached out for help, appeal almost, and somebody gifted me through her a computer. It wasn't a brand new one, but it was a computer, so a PC that she said to me, "I will give you this on the proviso you start a podcast." So I did. So that's where I started Dead Men Talk, which it was my platform, like I've already mentioned, to talk about my work and all the little bits, all the different inspirations behind all my stories. So I worked my way through the first season of that was about my work, and then I started welcoming on a couple of other author friends that I had as guests to talk about their work. And that is where it started to change. So I was reaching the end point of talking about all my stuff. So I was like, where do I go from here? And I was having such a blast with talking to other people that after that, the first 2 seasons of it, it turned purely into an interview show. and I would bring on authors, anyone from a creative spectrum, authors, musicians, actors, directors, anyone. Um, I had a couple of notable guests on there that were important for me. They may not be sort of household names, but they were really, really important for me. So it got me kind of, ticked a few things off my bucket list if I had one. And then the podcasting bug kind of stuck with me, and much to my wife's chagrin at times, I've actually launched 4 different shows since 2020. So I had one called Once Upon a Turnbuckle, which was dedicated to my childhood as a pro wrestling nut. So I
Yeah.
delved into the classic pro wrestling scene, and again that morphed from a one-man show into an interview show quite quickly. I've started one called Bite Size Britain, which was going to be very short, digestible episodes about just interesting places in the UK that had some historical meaning and good, quirky stories. I've not been able to do much with that one. It's been one of those that I kind of dipped into, but it came along at a time that I started to lose my availability. World started opening up, and I wasn't able to do the podcast and stuff as much. And Reverse Grid was my latest one that I started, which was all dedicated to my love for the British Touring Car Championship over here in the UK. So I've done wrestling, motorsport, history, and creative arts essentially. And
You're busy guy.
busy. I
Yeah, yeah,
certainly was.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's
Well, if you
tapered
want to
off.
share, if you want to share all that, sorry, you want to share all that information on the show
Okay.
notes, I'll be happy to share all that
I
for you.
will. No, I'll do
Yeah,
that.
that's
Thank you,
great.
mate. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
well done, well done.
yeah.
Yeah.
The world opening up again. I
Mm,
mean, it's continued to open up over the last few years, but last year, life started to take over again, and I didn't quite manage to keep it up. I had to step away from it.
I
But
hear
it was
you.
such a blast doing
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I love coming onto podcasts now
Mm,
because it gives me that kind of buzz again for doing this kind of thing. And
yeah,
yeah, I had to be dragged away from it at times. I'll say that there were times at which I spent more time doing
yeah.
this than I did anything
I
else.
know,
So
I know. Yeah, I know. Well done. It sounds brilliant. Great journey there. Well done. And can I ask as well, please, Chris? What has your best ways of promoting your books been for people that are listening to give them a kind of a helping hand? Have you
yeah.
found? Yeah,
I mean the obvious ones. I think the use of social media. Now I will say I've heard a lot of authors say this as well. Is we want to write, we want to be creative. Very few of us are very good at the marketing side because we've neither got the time, the patience, the resources to do it effectively. I think social media, having a Facebook page, an Instagram presence, X, Twitter, if you're that way inclined. I tried it, didn't get it, I must admit. But definitely Facebook was a good way. You build your following on Facebook, and you can do it on your page and in like writer groups or reader groups. And you look out for those groups on Facebook that you can join, and you can kind of partake and use those platforms to draw attention to you and your work as well. Um, it's really, really difficult because I'd say this day and age, the writing scene is one that has blown up completely. The ability to self-publish is a lot more accessible than it probably was
yeah.
5-10 years ago. And so there's so many people that are doing the same thing. If you can get the social media and make that work for you, that is a fantastic platform. TikTok as well, very, very effective if it's done right. I couldn't get there. I just didn't have the time or the knowledge of how to use it. But I see so many that are just doing really simple things. And getting out there in your community as well, the use of libraries. You'll find locally there's a lot of opportunities for getting out there. Even around here, there's a lot of opportunities for writers to do events. They don't have to be specifically writing events. I've done a couple of ones that have been almost like nature and conservation related, but because they kind of link into the topics of my books,
Mm,
my little brown moth books. I've been invited along to those, and it's looking for those opportunities that's not specifically
yeah,
writer orientated. Try to find a gap in the market to get yourself out there locally. There's so many places that will support local artists, local writers. That's definitely a good starting point.
Thanks a lot for sharing that. That's really helpful for anybody that's
No
listening.
worries.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris.
No.
And have you tried the markets? Like there's some markets in Dublin you can go to and sell your books there. Is that an avenue you've tried?
I haven't.
Can you go?
No. Yeah, I mean, we have our market here in town. I mean, the local one that we have in town used to be a lot bigger than it is now, and it's I think having the one thing that draws me back from that is having enough stock to warrant doing something like that. When I've done these sort of in-person events, I've had to make sure that I actually, get some stock in, sort of something to sell. I've done my very, very first author event. I went and I only had sample copies of my books because I couldn't afford to stock up on them when I was self-publishing, or even with the independent publishers I've been with. You have to pay towards author copies. So if I had a stash here, I would do a lot more, because it's very important to have that physical presence of them. Otherwise, people aren't going to be interested. You're not going to kind of catch people's eyes. So if I was better kitted out, excuse me, with that, absolutely. Local markets here in Devon, we got a lot of little towns that do all these kind of things. They have, town fairs quite a lot, especially through the summer. There's a lot of opportunity. It's just finding that balance to be able to have the the amount of physical product to be able to do them. This is my struggle.
Yeah, that's right. Have you tried skills at all, Chris? Have you done any reading
Uh,
skills?
I haven't, no. And again, I see my kids are at school, and when I was releasing my first book, I don't even think my first one was out yet. And a couple of the teachers there were very, very interested, and they were going to get me in and that. And again, it was just at that wrong time. And had I been able to carry the momentum through, I probably would have. There's a couple of local writers down here who I do look up to. They've done fantastic work with the local schools, and they're always in there. Um, it would, again, it's probably, if I'd have chosen to pursue it more once the world was opening back up, rather than letting other things get in the way, I probably would be there, um, or would have been there by now. But no, still an avenue for me to kind of crack.
Yeah, yeah.
So
No, it's good to kind of give people a bit of information of what way we do it, isn't it? Like so,
mm,
great stuff.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great, Chris. Can I just ask you one final question? What's next for yourself in your writing? Have you anything to promote going forward?
Um, that is a good question, because I mean, recently I'm one of those guys who tried not to get too hung up on the material side of writing. I want to write for the love of it, and I think where I stepped away from my writing for a few years, concentrating on my podcast and other things, I found when I was going back to writing, I was doing it because I felt I had to do it. And over the last couple of years, when I've tried to write, I found it a real struggle. And so I've kind of gone through a bit of a dilemma of, am I really kitted out for it now? Am I really good enough for it? So I think what I decided fairly recently was I needed to take a step back to rediscover my love of it. So that when I had an idea that just wouldn't leave me, I would then be writing for myself, rather than just like, I need to get a book out this year. I haven't done this in so long, or whatever. Ironically, as I've pulled away from it a little bit over the last couple of months, it started going on again. So I've got a few things kind of on the go, maybe more up here than on the page. I do have another children's book, which is, I would say, probably about 80% complete. That was a few. It's been a couple of years since I picked it up, and it goes to the next age level. I was kind of following where the stages my kids were at, really, because again, I wrote my Little Moth books when they were of that age that they were enjoying them. Then we moved on to something like Captain Underpants. So it was like the sort of 8 to 12, a bit more. It wasn't, a chapter book kind of, early reader chapter book kind of length. They were enjoying those. So I wrote one. It was called Up There, Down There, and Dropping Stuff. And it's the main character is a scientist, a very, very hapless scientist who basically just gets everything wrong whenever he tries to come up with the next best thing. And I want to go back to that, and it's not going to take a lot for me to be able to finish that. So my aim is to get that done and self-publish that and get that out there. The one thing that's holding me back is illustrating it, because that's very difficult, very expensive when you're trying to do it yourself and trying to find someone. I don't think it's a book that really needs it because of the age range it's for. So I just need to finish that and hopefully get that out. Um, The other thing I really want to do is a non-fiction offering as well. I've got a couple of ideas of not writing my life story because I I haven't really had a life worth telling, I don't think, to be fair. But through my podcasting, I have developed, like I've mentioned, this real love for inspiration, where people's inspiration comes from. And I think writing from that angle and, a book to go is almost like a companion alongside that podcast that I did. And also delving into the process of creativity itself, and kind of where things have come from for me, the kind of things that have gone on in my life, which has meant I've created something. It's probably just writing my story, but through that vein, kind of looking at the creative process for me. It's something I really, really would like to do. It's getting me out of the fiction element and kind of, writing more about something that is true. So yeah, so one of those I'm hoping to kind of get going some point this year. So
Yeah, so lots to look forward to from you, Chris.
hope so.
Yeah, great
I hope
stuff.
so.
Yeah, yeah. No, that
Yeah,
sounds really good idea. Like to put like a non-fiction because I like a lot of that kind of stuff myself. So
cool,
look forward to reading that when it comes out.
cool.
so
Yeah, thank you, man.
make sure it's been a pleasure talking to you today, Chris.
And
And
you.
definitely share all your links to your work, and I'll put it on the podcast for
Thank
you.
you.
Podcast show notes. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
Chris, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks everyone for tuning in today to Mark's motivational podcast on our Arthur's Tuesday with Chris Tatra Trot Blay. Is that right? Yeah. Sorry.
That's it. Tetrarult Blay. There you
Tatra
go.
Blay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. So
No
thanks
worries.
again. I wish you all the success going forward, whatever you
Thank
do,
you.
Chris. And
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. It's been amazing.
yeah,
Cheers.
great. And make sure you check out all Chris's work. I'll be putting them on the show notes, so have a look at the show notes. Take care. See you next
Awesome.
time.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Thanks, Chris. Cheers.
Hello, everyone. Mark here. Thank you for watching another episode of my Authors Tuesday podcast. I recently published a book of children's stories called The Adventures of Larry Lamppost and Friends. The book began life as bedtime stories I wrote for my own children. If you'd like to purchase my book, follow the link in the description box below. By buying my book, you are also supporting my podcast series for authors, which is giving a voice to writers in Ireland and across the world.